Carl Jung discovered something that would terrify every narcissist. A fed-up empath is more dangerous than they ever imagined, not because they become cruel, but because they become unbreakable. In his decades of clinical observation, Jung documented a psychological phenomenon so profound it challenged everything we thought we knew about power dynamics. He watched empaths, those gentle, giving souls who absorb everyone's pain, reach a breaking point that transforms them into something far more formidable than their abusers. Jung called this the alchemical moment, when years of absorbed poison suddenly transmutes into pure psychological gold. The empath stops being the passive vessel for others' darkness and becomes an active force of light that no manipulation can dim. The most shocking part? Jung realized that narcissists unconsciously fear this transformation more than anything else, because a fed-up empath doesn't fight back with the same weapons. They transcend the entire battlefield. Join me as we descend into Jung's most profound insights about what happens when the gentlest souls finally say, "Enough," and why that moment changes everything. Because here's what Jung discovered that modern psychology still refuses to acknowledge. The empath's gentleness was never weakness. It was strength in disguise, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. But for empaths, this acceptance requires something even more terrifying, accepting that they possess a power they've been taught to fear. What I call the shadow integration of the wounded healer." Think about this from Jung's perspective on archetypes. The empath embodies what he called the wounded healer, someone who gains wisdom through suffering. But Jung observed something remarkable. When this archetype reaches its breaking point, it doesn't break. It transforms into what I call the sovereign healer, someone who heals from a position of strength rather than sacrifice. This transformation isn't gentle. It's not a gradual awakening accompanied by soft music and meditation. It's what Jung called enantiodromia, the principle that everything eventually turns into its opposite. The endless giver becomes the conscious chooser. The perpetual absorber becomes the strategic reflector. Modern neuroscience confirms what Jung intuited. Empaths' brains are wired differently. Dr. Judith Orloff's research shows that empathic individuals have hyperactive mirror neurons and heightened activity in areas associated with emotional processing. But what Jung realized, and what science is just catching up to, is that this same wiring that makes empaths vulnerable also makes them incredibly powerful when they learn to direct it consciously. But that's not the most dangerous part. The most dangerous part is what happens when an empath finally integrates what Jung called the shadow. All the repressed anger, boundaries, and self-protection they've been taught to deny. Jung observed that empaths don't just suppress their own negative emotions, they become unconscious containers for everyone else's shadow material. The rage their parents couldn't express, grief their friends couldn't process, the manipulation their partners couldn't acknowledge. The empath becomes what I call a walking trauma repository. But Jung discovered something extraordinary. When empaths finally reach their limit, they don't just release this accumulated shadow, they alchemize it. They transform years of absorbed poison into what he called psychological gold. This is the process Jung termed the transcendent function, the ability to transform opposite forces into something entirely new. Here's how this transformation actually unfolds, and this is where Jung's observations become terrifying for narcissists. Stage 1. The recognition. The empath suddenly sees the pattern. All those times they absorbed blame that wasn't theirs. All those moments they apologized for others' bad behavior. All those years they believed that love meant endless giving while receiving crumbs. Jung called this the lifting of the veil, when unconscious patterns become conscious. Stage 2, the integration. The empath doesn't reject their sensitivity. They weaponize it. They use their hyper-perceptive abilities not to absorb and please, but to see through manipulation before it begins. Jung observed that integrated empaths become psychological seers. They can read people's unconscious motivations with surgical precision. Stage 3. The sovereignty. The empath stops seeking external validation and becomes what Jung called individuated, psychologically whole and self-directed. They no longer need others to complete them because they've completed themselves through conscious shadow work. This process creates what I call the empathic paradox. The more an empath integrates their shadow, the more compassionate they become. But their compassion is no longer naive. It's fierce, discerning, and absolutely terrifying to those who depend on empathic dysfunction to feel powerful. If you've ever been told you're too sensitive, but felt there was hidden strength in that sensitivity, comment, "My sensitivity is my superpower." Now you're discovering what Jung called the dark side of empathy, not the absorption of others' pain, but the conscious use of empathic abilities for discernment and protection. When an empath awakens, their sensitivity doesn't diminish. It becomes surgical. They can feel the narcissist's emotional state beneath their performance. They sense manipulation before it's fully formed. They detect lies through micro-expressions and energy shifts that others miss completely. Jung understood that this level of perception is actually a form of what he called active imagination, the ability to perceive psychological realities that operate beneath surface appearances. The awakened empath becomes what I call a truth detector, that no amount of charm or manipulation